Hey, it's Eric. Welcome to Work Comp Talk. I'm guest hosting today with Bilal, the actual host of Work Comp Talk. Carmen is on vacation. We are recording a couple of these while she's gone. It's been a lot of fun. We just released our 10th anniversary episode the other day. I believe this one is episode 80 something, which is amazing. I started it with Carmen at the beginning, and then Bilal took over. Bilal and Carmen have done an amazing job. I invite everybody to go back and take a listen to some of their episodes. Today, we're going to jump right in on this. Bilal, welcome to your own show.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. That's cool. We're going to talk about firefighter presumptions today. We're headed into firefighter season. And in California does a pretty darn good job at protecting our firefighters. At least we try here to protect our firefighters. Most firefighters retire. I won't say most, but I think it's 30 or 40% it's reaching are coming down with cancers. And the state legislature has tried to address these issues within workers' comp, and they call them the firefighter presumptions. But I don't think it's just firefighters. So regardless, Bilal is one of the few people in this state that really understands these the way the legislature intended them. So we wanted to jump right in and talk to Bilal about these presumptions. So Bilal, tell us about them.
So like you said, firefighters get presumptions for injuries. Basically, in normal workers' comp world, you have to prove your injuries. It's not simple enough to go and say, hey, I got hurt at work and then I get benefits. You have to go to a doctor. You have to establish medical evidence. Firefighters, along with other professions like law enforcement officers, corrections officers, get these presumptions for various things associated with their specific work duties. For example, police officers wear a gun belt. They have heavy stuff on their waist all day, every day. They get a presumption for low back injuries for that. Firefighters get some similar presumptions depending on what's at stake. But, like you said, they have a high rate of cancer because they're exposed to known carcinogens day in, day out, whether it's diesel fuel or it's structure fire debris and things like that. The smoke can be toxic and to known carcinogen and increases their likelihood of contracting cancer in the course of their employment. And so it's common knowledge enough and with enough frequency that the legislature said, hey, these people shouldn't have to prove their injuries. It's just they have this heightened risk of exposure that's far more than what you and I and the general public would experience. We're not exposed to cancer, carcinogens every day. We're not breathing in smoke and toxic fumes. We're not around diesel fuel and a bunch of other stuff. And so the legislature is basically looking out for our firefighters by saying, hey, look, it's so likely that you're going to have cancer or pneumonia or heart trouble related to your employment or PTSD now. We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And so your injury, as alleged, is presumed to have occurred at work, unless there's some controverting evidence out there, some medical report that says it's entirely unrelated.
So let's talk about what a presumption actually is, because presumptions exist in law all the time. The basic of a presumption, and some people might be surprised to learn that I am actually a lawyer too, that the presumption itself is, if you're a firefighter, it is presumed that if you have cancer or certain types of cancers, it's not all cancers. Is that correct, Bilal?
Yeah, it's cancer, pneumonia, heart trouble, tuberculosis, PTSD. There's a number of different presumptions covering different body parts and systems.
Okay. So if you have them and you are a firefighter or other professions, it's presumed that it's caused by your profession. Where if you're an accountant and you have the same type of cancer, it's not going to be presumed that it's there. Now, I assume it's a rebuttable presumption and not a conclusive presumption, correct?
Yeah, it's a rebuttable presumption, which means that if there's
evidence.
substantial medical evidence out there that says, hey, look, this is entirely unrelated to your work, then obviously it can impact the doctor's opinion in your case and whether or not it's work related, and certainly whether or not you would prevail on your presumption.
So this is really similar in some ways to what was happening with the ALS and the concussion issues that were going on in the NFL. We were one of the first firms to do an ALS case in NFL, and we had to prove that the concussions were linked to ALS with Kevin Turner, who has since passed away from ALS. And we had to go prove it. And we had one doctor that really had done some research, and we used that. Now there are different levels of presumption that they just assume that if this exists. Now, I'm not sure it's a full presumption in the NFL cases, but the concussion cases themselves, not in work comp NFL cases, but in the concussion cases themselves, there is a presumption that if you have these various brain diseases based on, and you played in the NFL, it's presumed that those concussions had caused those. But it is again a rebuttable presumption that if you have lung cancer and you were a smoker, they can probably try to use that to say, hey, you were only a firefighter for this amount of time. Your cancer was probably caused because you were a smoker. Are there other states that do this as well? Do you have any idea if other states do this, Bilal, or is it just California?
Work comp is a state level benefit, and so each state crafts their own legislation and has their own rules for everything. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure whether there are. There probably are. Firefighter unions are generally pretty strong, and I think they're pretty heavily involved in advocating for the rights of their members. And so I think it's through those efforts that some of these presumptions get put into place. Mm-hmm. So, I think there probably is. I just don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. So how does this play out here in what you've seen? Because I know, you've represented a lot of firefighters in your career. And how do these things play out? Because I know that there's one, we're not going to mention the client's names in any way, but I remember that there's one, I think one of the first ones quite a few years ago that we took in when the presumptions were put into place, that the insurance companies were just fighting this left and right, regardless of the presumptions.
Yeah, they always fight them. I think depending on the case, for cancer, there's pretty big financial liability, certainly for disability and, the medical care on top of that. It's case by case, adjuster by adjuster. We develop working relationships with the adjusters, with some cities and municipalities because, we represent the firefighters. And so we get to know them and we understand how they work. And, it just depends on the case. When it's a clear cut case, usually they don't fight the presumption too much. I think the one we see the most that they fight is, PTSD. And typically we don't see a lot of those cases just yet. Recently there was a presumption passed for that. And I think despite the presumption, the guys are still afraid to talk about what's going on with them. They're exposed to death and destruction day in, day out. They go through their own personal struggles on account of their job duties. And no one talks about how difficult and taxing that is on them long term. And so I know there's been a big push amongst the unions for their members to actually speak up and confront their emotions and speak to people, professionals, about what they're going through mentally. But, it's still one of those things where it's brushed aside a lot. And I think a lot of the firefighters don't know that they necessarily have that presumption there for PTSD, even though, it's afflicting a lot of people, whether or not they even know about it or want to recognize it.
So how is the PTSD? Because I know that there are psych cases in workers' comp happen all the time, but there's certain things that have to happen in basic psych cases, and we can do another show on psych cases themselves on regular comp. But unless you're in a position for a certain amount of time, you don't get a psych case, with certain exceptions like armed robbery, things like violence in workplace. Those will jump in even if you're just there for one day. for workers' comp in psych cases or PTSD, for firefighter cases, or for peace officer cases, what's the difference in those?
I think the big difference you see in peace officer or firefighter cases are the impact of your mental health on your ability to continue with your job. There's a huge amount of trust in law enforcement and firefighters, and there's a huge amount of mental, fortitude and stamina that's required. And so I think when you're talking about PTSD, the implication could be that someone could potentially be work restricted out of their employment. And so it's a delicate balance between, going to a mental health professional and talking about how much damage your work has done to your psyche, and then still at the same time being able to continue on in the field with unrestricted duty.
Do you have to be employed as a firefighter, peace officer, whatever it is, under the presumption? Do you have to be employed for a certain amount of time?
No, but the extent that you can plead the case after your employment is also extended by the amount of service, which is a little bit different than normal rules for workers' comp. I think generally because it's recognized that probably the more time you're in the field, the more likely it is you're going to be exposed to really bad stuff. And so there's some level of sympathy, I guess, in the legislation written in to give people an opportunity post-retirement to be able to file the cases.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what should we've pretty much dealt with this this when it comes to PTSD for firefighters, or presumptions for firefighters rather than sort of more globally. But it does apply to peace officers, right? What are the other types of professions that this covers? Paramedics?
Yeah, it's really, even volunteer, well, not necessarily complete volunteers, but, it does cover a wide range of, I guess you'd call them frontline or first responders.
Okay, first responders.
So there's legislation's written for various responsibilities and roles. And, there's, for example, you could be a city firefighter, you could be part of Cal Firefighter, you could be a volunteer firefighter, in law enforcement, you can be part of the jails working for the sheriff's department, or you could be, an actual police officer, or you could be a state DOJ police officer. There's varying degrees of law enforcement, and the legislation has those all kind of codified and written into the statutes of who it applies for.
So I'm just going to wrap up with a question about retired, because you mentioned retired. This is a big deal. They don't quite have the same benefits that they used to have. We used to do these in the NFL cases all the time, which is where after somebody is retired, because these are very, very physical jobs. So sort of from head to toe, they can be injured. You talked about, back issues, but knees, elbows, you name it. Not just internal injuries, but general physical injuries. Talk about what the firefighters can do after they retire, because a lot of people think you have to file a workers' comp case while you're employed, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I mean, it depends. There's statute of limitations, obviously, for injuries, and it's whether or not you knew you had a work injury and whether or not it's considered post-termination, which is a legal defense. You definitely want to file cases if you're planning to retire. You don't want to be in a position where you're after the fact trying to file a retirement case, having known that it was a workers' comp case. But then again, it's all about a delicate balance. If your intent is to continue working, maybe you push through your symptoms and you deal with things and kind of try and self-modify or limit the care you're getting as much as possible so you can stay on the job. Because I think when you have these kitchen sink claims where you kind of throw in everything, you end up with work restrictions, and you could be work restricted out of your job. And in the case of firefighters, if you don't have enough service credit for your normal CalPERS retirement, you have to file disability retirement through CalPERS, which is its own process.
So I know that a lot of the guys that we've represented over the years, they don't want to file the kitchen sink stuff until they're ready to retire. Mm-hmm. Once they're ready to retire, then they're okay with the kitchen sink stuff. But they really just want to make sure that they get the treatment and they get paid out whatever that moderate amount is for these individuals. They hurt the wrist, they want to go back to the job because they are interested in getting all of that, reaching retirement. And at the bottom line is one of the reasons that I love working with firefighters and working with peace officers and frontline people is they really do care about human beings and the people that they're serving. They're not they didn't take the job because, hey, they get to retire young. They took the job because they want to help people. And so they are interested in, they don't want the desk jobs. They don't want the restricted duties. They want to heal and they want to get back to work. And that's what I found more than anything about the firefighters and the various civic professions that we work with is they're very principled. They're very principled people. So this has been really helpful to me because I know that it was more you working on the firefighter cases with Shane and Mike in our office. Shane, I think, is our resident guy with the firefighters. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, so this has been, eye-opening, but part of the reason that I wanted to bring this up is not just that we're running into firefighter season, but there's been a lot of talk about the presumptions and even somebody from San Francisco, a politician from San Francisco, kind of fighting the firefighters a little bit on these presumptions. I saw it posted on Instagram, and I thought, this is, it's time to speak out on the firefighters. And also our buddy Zach is running for city council in Oakland as well. So more power to Zach. He's a great guy. He was head of the union in Oakland 55. So wish him well. Anyway, thank you very much, Bilal, for leading us again through this, and we'll see you on the next one.